Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Grab your notepad and your pen because I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment to yourself that you will jot down at least one action item that you can implement in your business today. That's what this is all about. Implementation to drive your business forward. Now, today we're going to continue in our discussion about Muda and examples of Muda. So if you haven't checked out the original video where we discuss the 7, and then there's a second video discussing the 8th form of waste as defined by the Toyota production system in the Toyota way, then I would invite you to do that. And today we are going to be continuing with what should be a playlist on giving examples to help better understand it. So just by way of reminder, I'm not looking to formally or comprehensively define Muda or waste. We should have already have done that. This discussion and these videos individually are trying to cite examples. And again, it's not going to be any, of course, comprehensive list of examples. There's unlimited number of examples of waste in various people's business. Instead, what I'm trying to do is just give examples to help you relate to the concept. It just makes it register and you bring it home more in your mind when you think of it in terms of your business. And that's what that notepad is for. I want you to jot down things as we go through this. I'll give an example of, like today we're going to talk about conveyance or transport. And this is often confused with motion. And it's, similar. I mean, there's movement involved anytime you transport or convey something. But as I give examples, you'll see the distinction. And that's what I'm getting at here is that by giving examples, number one, you can start to think of it in terms of your business and you can make this relevant, making yourself more effective as a manager, where you can start to look at the importance of removing waste in your business. Now, when I cite an example, it may not necessarily be wasteful. That exact example may not be wasteful in your business. So we do understand, and we have to have an agreement that this is just meant to stimulate your mind, meant to help you further define and make it more relevant for your business. So let's discuss a little bit more about conveyance or transport. So these are in no particular order. I chose to start with motion and movement. Now we're moving on to conveyance and transport. Really, it helps me to memorize them in a particular order, but you could probably memorize them in your own order. I've heard of people coming up with various acronyms to help them remember the various forms of waste, at least the first 7. So as I say, there's no particular order we're going through this. Let's look a little bit deeper at examples of conveyance and transport that might be causing you inefficiencies. They may be causing you problems with streamlining your operation, and therefore it's lowering value because it's increasing your expenses, and we want to eliminate waste as much as we can. Now, I do know that there's a little bit of confusion and overlap between motion and transport, and sometimes it can be difficult when you're just focusing on definitions as opposed to how it really relates in your business. So think of it this way. Motion involves the movement of the people or the equipment involved in the production process, whereas conveyance, also known as transport, is the movement of those materials or components that are, in fact, what we're trying to produce. They are the product. Okay, so think of it that way. Now, hopefully this doesn't cause more confusion, but I can think of at least one example in which moving people would be conveyance, and that is if the people themselves are the product. So an example would be live entertainment. So if you had to convey or transport the people from one location to another, say from where they live to where the stage is that they're going to perform on, and they are in fact the product, then that would be conveyance. That'd be transport. That wouldn't be motion. So we're thinking of that. I really hope you can understand. So as I'm doing this and I'm moving, this is motion, but I'm not conveying myself anywhere. Even though you might say, well, I'm the product here, I'm not transporting myself from one location to another. So in your business, when you're making your widgets, when you're delivering your service, if you are taking a portion of the materials, the components that constitute the product, and you're moving from one location to another, that's conveyance, that's transport. And remember that necessarily anything that you add as a procedural step in your logistics, in your production process, should add value. To the extent that it doesn't add value, it is wasteful. That's how we think of these things. We always want to add value. Now, we also understand that you can never entirely eliminate waste. These things are inherent naturally as part of all production cycles. And that's what's great about it, is that you can perpetually refine, you can perpetually improve and remove waste. You can always be looking at things. And what we said last time is that if it's more wasteful to remove the waste, then the benefit you get out of it, then you wouldn't do that, if that made sense. So that would be considered more of an investment. So if it was more costly for you to remove a particular form of waste than to just leave it in there, even though it's still wasteful, you consider that necessary waste. It's part of the investment in the process. But you don't write it off. You can document it, and you can later in the future, you might have better technology, better equipment, better procedural methods that enable you to, at a lower cost, more efficiently remove that waste. So you always want to be looking for how you can remove these things. It's all about adding value, and you can understand that from a customer's perspective. Having to transport your material from one location to another doesn't necessarily add value. Now, it may add value if that transport was getting it from your location or where you manufacture things to theirs. It might be adding convenience for them. So again, not just because something can be defined as transport or conveyance, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't add value. So again, always frame this from the context of, does this add value or not? Does this step add value? Always want to be engaged in things that add value. And if you are moving things, raw materials around your shop, that doesn't add any value to the final product. Now, you might find it's necessary based on the constrictions, the constraints you have for your facility, that it's necessary. You got to move things from the yard to the main shop floor or whatever. But from the customer's perspective, that didn't add any value. They wouldn't be willing to pay more. If your competitor had a better operation set up, a better facility where he didn't have to have that transport involved, that conveyance of that material, he would probably be able to price even lower than you, and yet the product quality could be the same. So there's an example of removing the waste because it didn't add any value can actually lower your costs, and that is going to increase your value from a pricing equation point of view. Another reason you can think of transport or conveyance as being wasteful is the risks involved in transport. So anytime, in my example of moving something from the yard to the shop floor, you run the risk of damaging those materials. You run the risk of destruction or misplacing or losing those materials, or you run the risk of delaying production for whatever reason. It delays production. If those materials were right where they were needed already, production would not be delayed. So these are things that actually detract from value. Of course, if you damage your materials, that can relate to defects, another form of waste. If you misplace or lose something, that's going to add costs. You're going to have to go out and purchase those materials that were lost or misplaced. And any delays are going to cost you money. Time is money. So that's another reason why transport and conveyance is thought of as very wasteful. So let's dive into some more specific examples, but not really specific. Like, I'm not going to get into industry. Like, if you are in the healthcare industry, I'm not going to talk about actually conveying from one location to another the medicines that you use, or the equipment, the x-rays or whatever. That's not what I mean by examples. I just want to give you a little bit more context that you can apply to whatever business you're in. So I'm going to bring up on the screen little bit of notes, and I'll make these available to you to download, so that later your homework assignment is to be able to find at least one example in your business where you are involved in conveyance, you are involved in transport in order to create your product or service, but you recognize it doesn't add value and there are risks inherent in doing that. And how can you minimize that? How can you reduce it? You're not going to eliminate it. How can you reduce it? So let me just pull that up on the screen right now. Okay, and as we go through this, I want you, as always, to think of your business. Some of these examples won't relate to you, and I don't want you to tune out because you think, oh, that doesn't apply in my business. Actually, if you use a little imagination, you can apply many of these examples in your business. So the first one I have on the screen here is raw materials. Now, this implies that you are making something from scratch, or you are in manufacturing, you are producing products. And you have to convey those products to get them, say, to the production site. You get them from, maybe you have some sort of commodity that's being mined that you have to get to your facility, or whatever raw materials are. They may not be that raw when you get them, but you've got to get them to your site. Or you're moving them within your site from one area to another based on your constraints for the facility capacity and how you're manufacturing things. Like, it would be ideal if once they arrive, they were exactly situated in a location that they will therefore go, or they would next go directly into production. But that's often not the case. You have to move it from one section to another, and you may have to do that multiple times while you're manufacturing. So what about the raw material storage? Maybe it makes sense for you to buy things in greater quantity. Maybe you're not doing the just-in-time inventory method, and you are buying things in such a quantity that you have to have storage, and your storage is probably not right in the middle of your production line. Therefore, you would have to convey those raw materials from storage to the production line and to the areas that they're needed when you're ready and the production line is going forward. What about intermediate components as an example? Partially completed products. So some of you are assembling things, whether it's food or, again, any kind of product that you're manufacturing, and you do it in batch work. You do a particular part of the production cycle because it makes most sense to do that, and then you're left with a partially completed product, and then you assemble or you continue with the production facility later. Maybe you have to retool, you have to set up your production line differently at that time, or it's like, okay, well, if you imagine a bakery and they were doing the batter for a particular cake, and they were making all of that, and then they set that aside while they begin another part of the step. So, or that another part of the production, another step, and then later they got to bring that batter back and so forth. So give some thought to your process as it relates to intermediate components, and are you moving them from one area? These are the same things repeating from one area to another within your facility. Again, do you have to put that stuff in storage? Is it going into a refrigeration area and then has to come back out later, and conveying it back and forth? Is that adding value, or is it just necessary? And can you think of a way that you can improve your process where it's no longer necessary because it doesn't add any value to the end consumer? And of course, you can see that some of these things like storage relates to inventory and weighting as well, which are other forms of Muda, and we'll be getting into those in another video and giving examples of that. But there's a lot of overlap, and you'll find that is the case when it comes to waste. Is one form of waste very much overlaps with another form of waste, or it begets, it causes. There's some causation, or at least some correlation in one form of waste causing another form of waste. Also, your finished products. When you have finished your manufacturing of whatever product you have, you need to move it from one area to another. For storage, again, maybe you're putting things in storage before you're gonna bring it out to the end consumer. Some of you are engaged, let's use the example again of food, where your customer's waiting right there. It's made to order. You're making stuff as soon as it's finished, you are handing it to the customer immediately, while others of you have to put things aside. You have to put it in storage for a little while, or you have to transport it to a whole nother location, another retail location, and that kind of thing. And that's what this is next point is saying, is that transporting to supply chain intermediaries. So if you don't deal directly with the end consumer, and many of you don't, then there is conveyance from your factory, from your production facility, to somebody else who may be some kind of wholesale vendor, and then it works its way down the supply chain to a retailer, and maybe it's distributed to various locations where the end consumer comes and gets it. All of those things do not add value to the customer. Well, they can add convenience, and we want to think of that, but to the extent that they don't add value, or there's a competing product that does it differently, you want to think to how you can eliminate these forms of conveyance and transport that don't necessarily add value to your customer. Delivering to end customers, again, that it sounds like, well, this adds value because delivery is a good thing, but there may be competing products that are able to do whatever their process works is much less. There's much less transport and conveyance involved based on their distribution channels, based on where their manufacturing is. Perhaps you do business internationally or throughout the entire nation, and you have one central location that you make this stuff, where somebody else has set up a different procedure for how they distribute. Their channels for distribution to the end consumer are far more distributed and decentralized, and therefore maybe there is a lack of conveyance, and they have minimized those types of transport that don't add value. What else have we got here? Documents. This is a big one. Now, we've been focused on your production line, that part of the process in which you make your product or service. And I'm going to get into services, because you're not immune to this if you have been thinking so far that, well, I deliver services, not products, so this doesn't apply to me. It definitely applies to you as well, just because my examples have been focused on manufacturing of products. We'll get into some other examples. But documents, no matter whether you're making products or services, you often have documents, and you are conveying those. You're transporting your documents from one location to another, maybe from one person's desk to another, and give some consideration to how can you mitigate this. So think about contracts, invoices, receipts, files, the various forms of documents. Maybe you have account files, these kinds of things. And we now live in an era where technology will allow you to store these things in a cloud-based storage system and organize it, and then people can access them. You can have customer portals and vendor portals and all these kinds of things where you can eliminate the transport, where you're actually, think about it, some of you have businesses where people are walking one file from one area in your business over to another, or you have particular sales orders that are printed on a piece of paper and they are being communicated via paper, and physically they are being transported from one location to another. Can you use a technology to eliminate that? And could you do so in a way that the costs you save, the efficiencies you gain, actually offset any cost of that technology? This is ever more so the case. Specialized knowledge. Okay, here's where we get into our service providers, but also for product manufacturers. But think about specialized knowledge. Those of you who are in the trades or that kind of stuff, I've got some examples here. Management is a form of specialized knowledge. And if you cannot convey, if you cannot communicate that specialized knowledge throughout the various areas of your business that it is needed to be distributed without physically bringing a manager from one location to another, then there is conveyance involved, there's transport. So I'm sharing with you a particular type of specialized knowledge right now, but I'm doing so where I don't have to physically move from one location to another. So this is an example of leveraging technology to distribute specialized knowledge without as much conveyance or transport involved. Again, those people in trades, so maybe you're a specialist in an electrician, you're a master electrician or plumber, something like this. Do you need to actually physically go from one location to another to bring that specialized knowledge? Or could this be done in a virtual environment? Now, this may seem a little getting ahead of ourselves, but this actually is going on right now. I'm aware of technologies. In fact, we have an app that you can use where trades can actually work from a virtual location and have a person on the other end who may have limited knowledge, and sort of the supervisor, the master electrician, can guide more of an apprentice level without being on site, and therefore there's no conveyance, there's no transport of that specialized knowledge physically from one location to the other. He doesn't have to be there, the expert alongside. And some people are doing this with their customers directly, showing their customers either through video like this, or they're actually going live with their customers and they don't have to transport that specialized knowledge through the trade. Repair and maintenance personnel is another thing of specialized knowledge that typically you would have to go from one location to another. That is the product, the service is the specialized knowledge. Also parts, for those of you who are in the aforementioned trades or repair business, you often are conveying parts from one location to another. And even if you are repairing things on site, I have a personal need to have something repaired and I'll be bringing it to the location where it's being repaired. Even on site, there's a lot of conveyance that needs to go. So the parts are being sourced from another location, brought to the facility where the repair work will be done. And then within that area, they're going to be stored for a time being. There's all sorts of waste in terms of the streamlining of the process that they could look to cut down on that don't add any value to me as the customer. So think of the parts. Some of you are inventorying parts, and I don't want to get into another form of Muda today, but you have them in your truck, or you have them somewhere stored in your shop, and then you have to load your truck up. That's conveyance. And then you have to transport it to the job site where you're going to do the work. And then you have some garbage and some waste. I don't even have that listed, but there's another example. You have trash or some kind of leftover that has to be recycled or disposed of in some way, and you have to transport that back. Maybe you're not disposing of that on the location where the repair work is being done. So those are the examples I put together, and I hope that you've been able to jot down a note or two about some other things that popped in your mind. Remember, that's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to stimulate your own thinking. I'm trying to get you to think in your business, what ways are we wasteful? Could we streamline? Can we perpetually refine and improve by the elimination of waste? And give some examples, write those down, and then measure. You got to time things. You got to decide also, you have to balance out the cost of the elimination of the waste versus the benefit you get from it. It's all about adding value. So that's where I want to leave it today on this one. We'll continue with this playlist. We'll go through all of the different forms of waste and we'll give examples. And undoubtedly, as you work your way through the 8 different forms, you will find there's a ton of ways that you can improve, you can streamline, you can eliminate waste, and therefore you'll be able to add greater value and have more success than your competition who doesn't do this. So I hope you got something out of this. Leave a comment, because when you leave a comment, whether you are agreeing with me or pushing back, somebody who reads that can learn, and we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.